Executive Alignment Manual 7.6, that each particular life is a universal combination of predestinic acceptance, not yet finally formed, and is unique and precious, wherein self-establishment is the task, where rescue is the covenant. Well, yes, indeed. Greetings to the present company, hoping that as we converge in this 4th year of our work, that everyone is in good health, good standing, and in a sense continue to escape the folly of our yesteryears. For in this being the 4th year, there is a very strong proposition which suggests that we now must begin to do, and of course know and be, if we are going to be true to what year 4 may actually represent in real terms. For do see, by way of process, this particular year represents the possibility of a ruby engagement. Now, what does that actually mean? A ruby engagement. Well, it means that we're going to start to do things in a way that is in simile and in concert with what the Executive Alignment Manual is here for. And of course, we're going to find out more about what that may presuppose. It means that it's going to move into a domain of our lives that is much more practical, in the sense of the onus will be on each individual to do the best that they can within their own lives. It's certainly going to suggest that this practicality will turn up in a concise way, which may be different from life to life. Now, what that means is one person may see the value of this work in a practical way in one way, but then another person will see the practicality and effectiveness of this work in another way. For if there's one thing that we can certainly confirm right off the bat, it is that each life is unique. And this, of course, presupposes that one's personal epiphany will have a uniqueness about it, and yet it comes into simile, or in other words, can be recognized by someone else, even though it's not their personal experience, because it's moving in the same direction, but more importantly, it's connected to the same thing, that which is real. And what is that which is real? Well, that's life. Regenerative life, to be specific. And all that comes with it. That for the most part, the world that we find ourselves in the early aspect of our lives, plays no real conscious part in. So this suggests, as we proceed, we will begin to consciously move clear of the traps and pitfalls of cultural life, to such a degree that one can look upon cultural life as being in the world but not of the world. Now, this doesn't mean with criticism, cynicism, negativity. It doesn't mean that a person is better than anyone else. It simply means that this is the year when something comes alive in a person to the point that they can actually feel the newness of what it is that now begins to make itself known to them in a way that is real. How that happens? Well, each person will be able to write their own story. But certainly, this being the Ruby year, the engagements that are about to follow throughout the year will have a flavor about them, somewhat highly personal, whereas prior to this point, the flavor was more impersonal with personal aspects to it. It's now going to move from impersonal with highly personal aspects to it. But having said that, the one thing that remains sure must be, as we start this new year, those of us within the present company that are taking their lives seriously will have something to bring forward about the 7.6 commentary. The reason for this stems from the fact that there certainly has been time for a person to sit down and read that commentary or listen to that commentary a few times and task the corroborating assemblies within one's life to offer up some type of notion concerning what this particular commentary may be mooting towards. Simply put, have an idea about what is being said. So getting back to the difference between attitude and altitude, we may remember that the difference between one's attitude and altitude is very similar, by way of analogy, to a rocket that is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Now, as we may remember, there are two very significant factors that must always be borne in mind when piloting one's rocket. The first one is to do with altitude. Now, it's highly unlikely that there are astronauts or NASA specialists within the present company. If there are, well, good for you. But the point is, one does not need to be a rocket scientist to understand that if one finds oneself outside of the atmosphere of the planet and determines to re-enter the planet's atmosphere, and in doing so is not aware of one's altitude, there is a danger that in re-entering into the planet's atmosphere, one will burn up. The reason why one will burn up is not because of heat, but it's because of heat generated because of coming into contact with resistance. This resistance is the planet's atmosphere. Now, some of us may recall the wisdom within the sentence, as above, so below. What this suggests is the laws that can be seen in small also define themselves in large. Here's an example of that. If a person goes water skiing and they hitch themselves up to a speedboat, and as the boat slowly moves along, as they are holding on with both hands to this water skiing cord, hitched to the back of the speedboat starts moving along at 1 or 2 miles per hour. They suddenly realize that, hold on a second, I'm not skiing. My skis are still under the surface of the water. It's not fun. Not my idea of skiing. So what happens is they signal, they've got these pre-arranged signals, speed this thing up, and the faster the speedboat goes, the more the water skis begin to lift until eventually they're skimming on the top of the water. So one asks the question, what is the relationship between the skis, the water, and the speed? And the answer is, in layman's terms, that is, that the faster one moves, the more resistance one meets from the water, until eventually the water offers up so much resistance directly proportionate to the speed that the skis now skim over the top of the surface of the water. In much the same way, on another level or scale, that the harder and faster one can throw a stone out of one's hands, the more chance there is that the stone will jump over the water and keep skimming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. harder one throws the stone, the more chance there is that this stone will actually continue to miraculously jump out of the water, apparently all by itself. Well, of course, there are many, many variables connected with skimming stones across the water. One is the shape of the stone. Two, the power that the stone is released from one's hand. And then certainly there is the factor of the angle that the stone is released from one's hand also, because if you throw a stone directly down into the water, it's not going to start skimming. There's a certain angle that needs to be incorporated, and depending on how precise that angle is in relation to the surface of the water will depend on whether or not those three factors work together to produce the desired effect, which is this skimming, this illusion of the stone jumping out of the water. But what's actually happening is the resistance that it's meeting is forcing it up, slowing it down until eventually it drops beneath the surface. I dare say that most people listening to this have experienced or seen this phenomena of the jumping stone or the skimming stone. But when we take that to another level, which is in this case skiing, we see that the principle embodied in skimming stones has been incorporated into the realms of skiing to such an extent that it's become a science. You can get specially shaped skis, you can get certain types of boat that don't offer too much wake. There's a certain technique incorporated in skiing at a high or world-class level. There's slalom skiing, speed skiing, there's all kinds of skiing. But the point is, to be effective, one needs to embody and come as close to the principles connected with the government, the order, and the domain of water. I'm sure you can appreciate that that's exactly what a world-class skier is accomplishing, a relationship of sympathetic resonance with the laws of so-called physics, the natural laws, to do with attitude and, of course, altitude, and the connecting variable, which is speed. Now, in actual fact, when a rocket, which is masculine, enters into a planetary domain, which is feminine, what we see here is a dynamic involving the interaction between the masculine and the feminine principles, which on another level can be deemed the dynamic that naturally exists between men and women. But at the end of the day, it's a principle, and this principle is to do with the feminine and the masculine principle of all things. Everything, to some degree, exhibits these aspects to do with altitude and attitude. But I digress.
Seen from inside of the spacecraft, it felt like there was somebody outside the spacecraft with a sledgehammer that was hammering here and there, up and down.
Re-entering the Earth's atmosphere may make for a bumpy ride, but it also provides a stunning light show. While watching footage from NASA, Gizmodo writer Attila Nagy noticed the spectacle happening outside the craft. Now, Earthbound people can get a glimpse of space too. The video snippet was captured when astronaut Mike Hopkins was on a return trip from the International Space Station and pointed a camera out the craft's window. Atmospheric re-entry generally makes for dramatic moments, as the friction between a vehicle and the air around it is significant enough to engulf the craft in a burning ball of plasma. Of course, with all of that comes a rare opportunity to catch a truly amazing sight.
One must understand then, if the rocket enters at the wrong angle, it's going to skim off the surface of the planet's atmosphere in the same way that a stone will skim off the surface of water. Conversely, if that rocket enters at too much of an acute angle, too directly, it's going to burn up in the same way that if a person falls out of an aeroplane and plummets from a few thousand feet into the ocean, if they survive the fall because of the resistance of the air that they're moving through, which will make it very, very difficult to breathe. When they hit the water, it will be like hitting a brick wall. Simply because there's not enough time for the water to get out of the way. And so, going back now to the rocket, that is the reason for this very sensible need to orbit the planet and slowly wind oneself in. There are other variables that also come into play, such as a respect for what one is doing. One would need to take one's time. Because why? The rocket is re-entering the planet's atmosphere, and there needs to be a respect for the fact that we're entering into a domain that is not our own. So this really does open up, especially if one has that prehensile mind where they can begin to put the abstract into practical terms, such as masculine and feminine principles, the work and oneself, where whether a person is an aspiring lady or an aspiring gentleman, when facing work of value, one would need to demonstrate a value for certain work by taking one's time to wind one's way in, so that one doesn't get burnt off. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And the reason why it makes perfect sense is because we've spent 3 years to be able to get to a place of common sense, a place where we can actually begin to start doing something and being conscious about why it is we're doing certain things in certain ways. This, of course, once again, is a ruby engagement. So this rocket is winding its way in, and slowly the angle of approach or the attitude corresponds with the speed and the altitude, so that a combination of these two things joined by the third thing, which is the speed, causes the rocket to safely re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, where no harm is done to the rocket and no disruption is caused, because the entry is a clean entry, or better still, a safe entry. But the point is, the onus is going to be on each life within the present company to see a need, now more than ever before, to genuinely and sincerely take up one's own mantle and say yes to doing it for oneself, where the school that one attends is in oneself, where the currency that one needs to spend to attend this school is in oneself, where the facilities that one uses is again in oneself. It's a beautiful state of affairs and tragic at the same time. For on the one hand, it could have been very different, and with that difference comes all kinds of benefits. However, things are what they are, and it is exactly the way it needs to be. It can only be this way. If it could have been another way, it would have been totally different. This is the way it is. And despite the shortcomings of having to approach this work in this particular way, it also comes with vast advantages as well. One of the more blatant advantages is the avoidance of the snake oil salesman and woman that exists in the world in this very territory of our endeavor. However, on the other hand, there is the grace and the grant of the reality that God is not a tyrant, and so therefore, if one takes one step towards refinement development, the attributes of refinement development will take 10 towards that intending individual. It can be done, and the advantage of having to do it this way is that each person will only have to tackle the snake oil salesman or woman in themselves. Know thyself, for to this extent, the resistance that one meets will, of course, be external, but it is the internal resistance that one is not aware of, or that one chooses to ignore or perhaps justify, that will ultimately cause the greatest type of resistance. One doesn't have to go anywhere to do this work. The work takes place within. One doesn't have to spend any money, for the currency that one will need to spend is the currency of one's own life, one's own emotions, the 5 powers of the soul, one's connections, one's sentiments. All of these things now become extremely valuable, and they will prove themselves to be the real gold and silver investments. This is something that we shall see. So it does appear as though this being almost like the opening statement for the year, it's saying, now is the time to do. I might add, it can be done. It certainly can be done. However, it would be remiss if there wasn't an opportunity for us to make that connection. And the best way to do that is to get into the work. Whenever one feels disconnected, get into something real, get into the work. Find some way to reheat or enliven what one has come to see, know, and be as real in oneself. Now this suggests that there's a custodial life superimposing itself upon all kinds of attitudes and assemblies which up until this point masqueraded as being custodial, but had no real custodial connection to that which is real. And by this time in year 4, I dare say for many of us, we've moved through a personal stop situation in ourselves where a moment of truth caused the life to actually stop and say, hold on a second, that must mean this. Or it may have turned up as a feeling that can't be put into words. It may turn up as something new appearing in one's life the minute they wake up, and they just can't account for it. They just don't feel the same. They've changed. As I said, each life is unique and different, but the results must have some connectivity to them. There must be some connectivity to them. Something that can be recognized from one life to the next. Ah yes, I didn't quite have that experience, but I know exactly what you mean. This kind of thing. So we are going to do something, and this being the first of year 4. But I want to congratulate everyone that stuck with it. I want you to know that first and foremost, I do this from a highly personal point of engagement. And in sharing this work, the person that benefits most from it is me. But having said that, we are in this together, and there will come a time, if it hasn't come already, where you begin to share the condensation, the crystallization, the fruit of your labor with others. Because that's the way it's supposed to be. And that's the way things become rich in this world. It doesn't really matter about numbers, as a matter of fact. It cannot be any other way. For high things will appear in small. However, having said that, point 1, which we're about to read now, makes certain things very clear. If this were the OPAL Frequencies New Year's address, and now as we close the first offering from the month of Peridot, we're going to read part 1 of the Executive Alignment Manual 7.6. which again is entitled taking a position. Therefore, see that to be actually able to take a position is a most valiant thing. For do see that anyone can take a position, but how many people in the world on January the 2nd, 2017 are genuinely concerned with taking a position of this order? I wonder. So here we go. Taking a position. Point 1. It should be understood and studied that the creation universe is arranged so that there is a desire urge in the second self part of the universe to amalgamate with the human domain and function. As in reverse, there is the same compulsion for the human to seek to join higher than self-entity or realms. Let's read that again. It should be understood and studied that the creation universe is arranged so that there is a desire urge in the second self part of the universe to amalgamate with the human domain and function. As in reverse, there is the same compulsion for the human to seek to join higher than self-entity or realms. Now that's the vitamin. That's the opening statement. And I understand that Leo emphasized the very first comments, the very first paragraph is in a sense the agate of things. For if one understands that very first paragraph, one understands everything else and is to follow. Everything else makes sense because it's coming out from the very first point of cause. So we're now going to go to the 7th point and read that. Point 7. The rescue part is what investment the human has made with these parts, and what form and quality of return will eventually be the case, in brackets, hopefully. There is one other important aspect, which is that these various help features cannot necessarily combine in naturalization in their own domains, but can do so inside the human temple, where certain marriages of these entity vitamins can occur. In this, the life of the human can assist in the refinement of this part of the universe by nurturing in the connective self all that has its origins in higher than human realms. That which liberates us itself gets liberated by becoming cohort. And we'll read that again. Point 7. The rescue part is what investment the human has made with these parts, and what form and quality of return will eventually be the case. Brackets, hopefully. There is one other important aspect, which is that these various help features cannot necessarily combine in naturalization in their own domains, but can do so inside the human temple, where certain marriages of these entity vitamins can occur. In this, the life of the human can assist in the refinement of this part of the universe by nurturing in the connective self all that has its origins in higher than human realms. That which liberates us itself gets liberated by becoming cohort. Now, we would be remiss if we didn't begin to look at the specifics of certain words used by Leo, because the one thing that is clear about any type of esoteric work is to do with shared reference and the specifics of shared reference in terms of language. Language is a very critical part, an intrinsic and specific aspect of work. For do see that we all use the same types of language, but the meanings of words used will become much more specific in order to convey an acute meaning of shared reference from one individual to another. Now, in vast contrast, when looking into the cultural aspects of things, words are used arbitrarily, and oftentimes one word will take up the exact antithesis of its original and true meaning. However, it's been made clear, and it's going to be made clear again, especially now that we endeavor to engage with the ruby of this work, not the ruby of ourselves, but the ruby of this work. And it's also rather ironic that in starting our endeavor with the 7th point, bearing in mind the first point as we proceed, there's also the fact that now one has had an opportunity to engage with the entire content of 7.6. So, of course, it would be wise to get as close to the invested meaning of the specific words used by Leo. We're going to start with the word cohort, C-O-H-O-R-T. If one picks up a dictionary and gets a decent dictionary, one may come across 3 different meanings, 3 different interpretations for the word cohort. In the first instance, it will suggest that the word cohort is an ancient Roman military unit comprising of 6 centuries, equal to 1/10 of a legion. The second entry suggests cohort is a group of people banded together or treated as a group. And then thirdly, cohort is suggested to be a supporter or companion. It's also suggested that the use of the word cohort was originally meant to describe one of the 10 divisions of a legion in the Roman army, containing from 300 to 600 men. The most common use of cohort today is in the sense of group or company. Now, if there was such a thing as an OPAL frequencies dictionary, one would certainly be inclined to suggest that in terms of the word cohort in relation to the human in the universe, some of the meanings that one could offer up revolve around becoming cohort with something. From an esoteric standpoint, suggests a connection made by virtue of the fact of being in simile and in concert with that which one is in the company of and with. So again, this is fundamentally the opening address for us within the present company moving forward into the year, in which, this being the ruby year, it's going to be increasingly incumbent upon us as we proceed to begin to be and do for ourselves. And nothing could be more marvelous than that, really. For who would want someone else to take up the responsibility and do it for us? At the end of the day, when all is said and done, what is given can be taken away, but what is earned is one's to keep. Once again, I do hope that we find ourselves in this new year in good stead, unscathed and unharmed, full of enthusiasm for what can surely be the year of harvest, the year of recompense, the year of resolution. Time within this planet when every man will get paid according to his work. It's already beginning to happen. Every man is going to get paid according to his work. And I can tell you this, all will be revealed. Until next time, this is OPAL Frequencies.
If you believe that you get out what you put in, you better move on, 'cause there's no time to fool around. All the right intentions and promises don't mean a thing if you can't get the job done. If you insist on making life a compromise, you're gonna wake up to find your world has come undone. All the right intentions and promises are never enough, and soon you'll find it all gone. Now time has come, make up your mind to be real. Baby, 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 good love, precious and gifted, can't stand waiting forever. Good love, no greater feeling, no one could ever deny. Stop wasting all the good love. You've taken your time coming around to let me know. Now you better decide, 'cause there's a limit to your game. Let your intuition lead you on. Follow the signs to the place where you belong. If you believe that you get out what you put in, you better move on, 'cause there's no time to fool around. All the right intentions and promises don't mean a thing if you can't get the job done.
Wake up out of your slumber. This is the time to answer.